others to go on mute, please. Request all the others to go on mute, please. Yeah.
Sorry,
no problems. Please do mute. Yeah. Thank you.
I will check who is.
No, it's okay. You can just mute it on the bar. The organizers can mute it. Yeah. Okay. Let's just continue. And we'll take it ahead. So I'll first talk about business. I want to tell you more about business because at the end of the day, as entrepreneurs, you're out there building a business. Activities and a few lessons for scientists and researchers as well. So let's talk a little bit about business first. Since this is the opening talk of this program, I want to just give you a little bit of a framework to think, and then we can take it ahead from there. So when we talk about business, what is business, right? There are many people who have very simplistic definitions of business, but let's just talk about any business. So every business that you see around you always solves a problem or meets an unmet need. And there is a revenue model around that need. And then that revenue model helps it fund the business's costs and growth, right? So even if you take a simple grocery store near your house, the problem or the need that they're trying to meet is that you want convenience. You want to get products and as soon as possible without a delay period, without having to wait for delivery, without having to do anything like going online, booking, and so on and so forth, right? Or having to go to a far off shop. So it's a matter, what they're providing you is especially an convenient option for you to buy some products, and for that they are charging you something. So they of course have bought something at a lower price and are selling you at a little higher price, and the margin is their revenue model around that need, and so they have basically monetized that need, and that funds their cost as well as their growth. So if they do well, they can grow and set up those shops in many more places. So this is a story of every business, irrespective of whatever you are doing. I haven't seen any exceptions to this general definition of a business. There's one other way you can think of businesses, which is you can think of it as an engine. As an entrepreneur or as any business person, you're building an engine, and that engine is an engine that converts raw materials in or resources in and produces some products and services which are of higher value. So there's a process of value addition and wealth creation that is happening when you run a business, and that again is very central to a business. An easy way to think about it is a factory, is a physical factory of some kind. You might have thought about, say, for example, a factory that Reliance has built for petrochemicals, right? It is taking some inputs and producing some outputs, and there is some value addition that is happening in the process, and therefore wealth creation and opportunity creation is happening over a period of time. Another way of thinking of a business is this graph out here. And this graph has a y-axis, which says money out there, and the right and the x-axis, which says time, which says it's basically time. And you'll see that this graph shows that you're first going into the red, investing in any activity that you're undertaking, and then you climb out, and there is a potential reward at the end. Now, the whole, the area that is shown as the whole out there, that is your investment or the risk you're taking, and the gray area on the right hand side is a potential reward that you can get out of it. Clearly, the reward should be greater than the risk in any endeavor that you undertake, or at least intend to undertake, and that's what you want happening in anything that you do. So it is in a business as well. So the idea is that you're putting in some effort, some money, investment into an activity, and climbing out to a certain reward. And all the people who want to participate in this process are participating because they're interested in the reward. The reward can be money as shown here. It can also be soft things, by the way, which I will talk a little bit about. But always to have a sustainable business, you need to have the first y-axis as money. You can have other y-axes as I'll show you as well. Now, different businesses go to different depths in terms of investment out here. So they will invest more, and their time to positive cash flows can be different. In a IT company, you might get positive sooner, you might invest lesser, whereas in a biotech company, you might invest a lot more. Your time to get out into positive cash flows might be higher. But the general rule always is that people take higher risks when there is potential for higher rewards. Or and otherwise, I mean, you would think that everybody would gravitate to something which would just be low risk and high rewards, right? That doesn't happen in real world. You have to balance the two, and that is the reality of the world. So in many companies where you see that people are taking a lot more risk, they're of course trying to achieve a higher reward, but there's also another angle to it, which is how certain is this graph, or how certain are you making it out to be? When as a businessman, when you create such a graph, tell a story that this is the reward that will come out of my efforts that I put in the beginning. You're also trying to say that this graph will look something like this. It will not be, say, going down, or it will not be lower in numbers, or it could. You're not trying to. It's not an uncertain picture that you're painting, although there is some uncertainty involved. So it's your job to reduce some of that uncertainty as well as a business person. Now, a part of that uncertainty is also got to do with things like, for example, how well you protect your technology and what is the risk from other participants entering the picture and therefore changing your graph for you because there's competition and so on and so forth. So this graph is central to all business stories. Now, in a certain class of businesses called social enterprises, you can have a second y-axis. By the way, I'm telling you it's a second y-axis. That means it's never the first y-axis. First y-axis has to be money because it has to be sustainable. Okay, but over a period of time, but you can choose to have a second y-axis, and that it could be impact of some kind. It could be job creation. It could be say lives saved. It could be products which serve a certain social purpose, whatever it is. But that is usually the second axis, but the story still remains the same. It's just that there are two axes. The first axis is something which you have to show. The second one is something some investors will expect you to show, some of your partners will want to show, and you might want to include that because you yourself are motivated by that impact as well. And in return, some investors, some participants in your process might be willing to accept a little lower reward just because, or participate in it more proactively just because they care about the second y-axis, which is impact, right? So for us in Venture Center, the role model for social entrepreneurship is Amul. Amul is basically a for-profit company. It generates profits for all the participants in the value chain, be it producers, be it consumers. Everybody is gaining something out of it in terms of monetary terms. But of course, there's a lot of social impact that Amul is delivering as well. So it is also a business. It is a for-profit business, but it is a multiple bottom line business. That means there is impact also that matters. Some of you young people who haven't read this book might want to consider reading this book, which is a biography of Dr. Kurian called I Too Had a Dream, which is shown on the right-hand side out here. Okay. Today's talk is more about something called entrepreneurial businesses. So far I've told you about any business. Now I'm telling you a little bit about a class of businesses called entrepreneurial businesses. These are what you in common language call startups. And startups, there's a certain distinction compared to other businesses. They, of course, have the same other three things which are relevant to all businesses, which is that there is a problem that is being solved, there is a revenue model around that solution, and then there is something you need to meet your costs somehow, okay, and your growth. It need not happen immediately, but it will happen at some point of time eventually. But otherwise, you have to find ways to meet your costs. That could be through investments as well. But there are a few other things that happen in startups. First of all, foresight of an opportunity, that is a future opportunity, is very important in startups. Startups are basically building tomorrow's businesses for you, okay? And that foresight of a future comes usually from a unique understanding of needs or a unique access to a new solution which could be deployed to solve a problem. So let's take a very popular example. Say, for example, Elon Musk 10, 15 years ago, talking about electric vehicles being the future of the world, right? He saw a future. It's not that other companies did not see the same, but they weren't sold on it the same way. So he saw a future which other people were reluctant to see or play along. They thought they can wait, whereas he jumped in wholeheartedly, and he has shaped what today is Tesla, right, which has become a major player now in the automotive business as well, and seems to will hopefully become even bigger in the coming times as EV becomes a norm, electric vehicles becomes a norm. So there is foresight of the future that is very, very important. And that's where, as scientists and engineers, all of you might want to think about, is your education giving you an opportunity to foresee the future? It's not about just being trained hands. It's not about being just skilled. It is about looking at the future and saying that having a good judgment of what is going to be the future of the world in terms of opportunities. And this future, when you're looking at the future, you are proposing a solution for a need of the future. You will find very often that there will be lots of people who will not be believers. That means you will stand out there. You have convinced yourself that this is an opportunity of the future. And most people don't believe that because the world likes to move in a crowd. Okay. And there will be these visionaries who will look at the future and convince themselves. Okay. And of course, I hope they've convinced themselves with good data or good insights. It's not just whimsical, but nonetheless, they have seen an opportunity in the future. Invariably, that opportunity in the beginning is small and becomes big. So EV as an industry 15 years back was small. It's much bigger right now, will become probably even bigger in the future. So another characteristic of startups is that the opportunity looks small in the beginning and grows very rapidly. Now, because of this, big companies sometimes are blindsided because they are used to big markets and therefore they tend to ignore the smaller markets. That also means that for you as first generation entrepreneurs, it's an opportunity. You will see something which they don't see, and therefore there's an opportunity for you to perform in that marketplace and create value for yourself. So because it grows rapidly, you will find that it is also scalable. That means it scales very quickly. You can quickly start growing. So if you take a company like Flipkart, look at the growth it has seen in the last 10 years. You wouldn't expect that kind of a growth from, say, a traditional industry, which is in a mature segment. Or if you look at 15, 20 years back, exchange in the US versus today, the top companies have been completely replaced, right? You don't see the ExxonMobils. And one other point to remember here is that when you're thinking of such things as an entrepreneur, and typical has this, innovation, because there's something new that you're developing, a new way of looking at a problem, new way of looking at a solution, a new way of putting the two together and coming up with an idea which works, right? And introducing it in the market. Innovation as a market introduction Remember, it's market introduction of a technical or organizational novel, just its invention. That means he's saying that, look, you can come up with an idea. If it's not been introduced in the market, it's not an innovation, first of all. Okay. All the innovations you talk about are remembered because they hit the market eventually. And there are two types of innovations. One is technical, another is organizational. Technical example is, for example, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, right? There is a technical invention out there converting it into a product. On the other hand, you can have an organizational novelty. For example, Uber, right? Uber is not, there's no technical invention there. It is only use of engineering and technology to change the way business works in the taxi hiring business. Okay. So they've changed the business process entirely. Of it where science, technology, invention fits in. All of you are probably from the science background. So let me come back to that angle of it. First, I've talked about business, now science. There are different flavors of science that many of you perform. Very often, you might be studying a problem definition, like a disease, cause of a disease on its own, or a set of solutions, like a set of molecules on its own, right? For example, this year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry was won by a group of scientists who were building tools, which they eventually found out is relevant for the pharmaceutical industry, right? So they were building catalysts which can produce certain molecules which can be stereoselectively produced. Okay, that means you can produce only one type of stereoisomer if you want to. Now, that is useful in pharmaceuticals, and somebody has to figure out that particular molecule can be done with that process for a particular disease. So there's an element of understanding the problem, there's an element of understanding the tools, and then putting that together to make a technology. But there's a general rule that all of us as scientists want to see our science in being used, being noticed, right? You would love to do that. And it takes time for some people who might be in the so-called bore quadrant, whereas, some others are a little more impatient and they sit in the Edison's quadrant looking to solve immediate problems and creating value more immediately. Now, so generally speaking, the technology development process as a whole can be thought of in very simple terms as taking a problem, understanding it, figuring out a unique way of looking at it, taking a solution or a set of solutions, putting that together with the problem. And if you do it in a novel way, it becomes an invention. Okay, if there's no novelty in it, it's still a technology, but not necessarily an invention, right? Now, as scientists, we should be thinking at what kind of unique or early insights we have in the problem definition, or what kind of unique access we have to certain solutions, new toolkits, new methods, and so on and so forth. Now, interestingly, all of these things can happen at different places, different timelines. So somebody else in US might have discovered the need today, that this is the problem, this is the way diabetes works, right? So somebody 10 years back might have come up with a solution which was lying there, rusting out there in literature somewhere. And then third person comes maybe 10 years tomorrow or later and comes and puts them together and says, oh, these two things work together and I have an invention. So the whole process of inventions and coming up with technologies doesn't necessarily, there's a whole process of connecting the dots that is very important. This is very different from a linear approach that you might take in some of the science that you do. Here, it's all about connecting the dots. And I will give you one example of this a little later about how new technologies intertwined together can produce amazing results when people understand the connection between the two verticals of work that might be going on as well. Now, as a typical scientist, you usually like to work in the early stages. So you'll work in the problem side or the solution side. Some of you might take it a little further and decide to develop a technology. Maybe you'll do a key proof of concepts for it and maybe publish it and patent it and so on and so forth, right? And then you'll sit and wait for people to come and take it from you, right? That is the typical thing that happens in many research institutions. Now, on the other hand, the industry is more interested in the end on the right-hand side, which is the product that one is talking about out here. They increasingly are wanting to come late in the game and not necessarily early and take technologies very early. But it does work that sometimes companies come and take technologies from research labs, and then you have a happy marriage where everything ends up in the results in end products. I've shown here a few examples from NCL, some of the technologies which have hit the market, where we found, say, a partner interested in early stage worked with them, taken products to market, including, for example, this fabric conditioner or this sanitary napkin, or this big water bottles that you see has a unique molecule which NCL has a technology for, which is commercialized by a very large international player. So these kind of things do happen, but increasingly they're happening less frequently, and we expect that it will happen even lesser in the future. So there's a gap in expectations between where academia works and industry, and there's a gap in expectations, a gap in interests, motivations. Even people who have to come on the right-hand side and the industry side have to bet on something early. They're reluctant to bet on it for various reasons. They don't necessarily know if it will work, whether it's a good bet, whether the money spent is well spent, all of those things. So therefore, what happens is that there is a gap which increasingly has widened, and it's not only an India thing, it's also globally. Okay, so in the US too, this has widened considerably as large industry has moved away from early stage research, as the corporate R&D units and all have started closing down, and people have started focusing on downstream business. Therefore, the question is, how do you bridge this gap? And if you are working on interesting ideas, and if you think you can see the future of a given technology, are you working on things? How do you ensure that your ideas reach the end point? And if you're a scientist who is committed to seeing their science in use, you will try to find some ways out. And that's what has happened. So in the US too, many academics, research institutes have all gotten into converting their ideas into something little more tangible and moving the technology towards the right on this graph, that on this schematic that you see out here. And to make that happen, very often the vehicle that makes it happen, the translation, is entrepreneurship. Now just think about it. Suppose you are working in an early stage out here. Maybe the government will support you with a few lakhs of money. Maybe they'll spend 1 crore on you. But if you need 10 crores to take the technology to market, chances are very low that anybody is going to give you a grant to do that. And they won't trust your intentions if you're not really building a company which is committed to the end point on the right-hand side. If your intention and commitment is only to produce results, early stage results, and stop at filing a patent and publication, chances are that nobody's going to invest in that money, invest that kind of money to take it ahead. So you need ways to convert that show commitment to the end point. So the end point commitment comes from people who are really going to create value by reaching the end point. They are different from the people who create value, early stage value, by creating new concepts, right? And those people are the entrepreneurs, right? The entrepreneurs who are committed to the end point. They are going to try and make products, services, create value out of it. And to make that possible, they need a legal vehicle. And that legal vehicle is a company that they build. Now, that legal vehicle is a vehicle that incentivizes everybody to participate, whether it is an investor or a funder putting in money who is now convinced, oh, these guys are really building a business. They are putting their skin in the game. They are putting their efforts in it. They're taking risks. So there must be a better chance chance that they are willing to go to the right hand side. There are fellow co-founders, team members who will join in because they are also interested in the end point and not necessarily only in the left hand side of things, right? There will be suppliers, there will be customers, there will be co-development partners, industry partners, so many people participating through that vehicle. And that startup becomes then the vehicle to convert innovation. So in my view, entrepreneurship is the vehicle for delivering innovations to the end point in a sustainable and scalable manner. So with that, let me continue. So this is a quick primer for all of you. If you have not, if you missed some early part, here it is, which is when I look at technology, it is about just knowing how to do things, right? So it's a problem and accompanied with a solution for it, right? You're solving a given problem and you know how to do it, and that's technology. Invention is technology with an element of novelty, right? Innovation is invention taken with market introduction. That means it has reached the market. And entrepreneurship is a vehicle that makes innovation possible. And a key ingredient for for entrepreneurial vehicles is the entrepreneur. He or she is the champion of the end point. They are keen on taking it to the end point. They are not necessarily excited by just the process, but the end point is important for them, and they're working towards it. And that convinces everybody else to join in and to work towards it as well. Okay, now a few things about science-led entrepreneurship. So I've talked about entrepreneurship. What about where science is involved, right? So I told you key elements of a startup: provide solution to a problem. There is usually a foresight there, future opportunity, and therefore there's some uncertainty and risk. Innovation is based on organizational or technical novelty. There's a revenue model and there's scaling, right? These are elements of a startup, right? In science-based startup, this solution usually leverages specialized know-how, which you derive from your scientific, from scientific literature or your own training or your own insights. And this foresight again leverages scientific insight. So the future that you're seeing can be just because you have understood that this is going to be important. So for example, the guys who were working on mRNA vaccines had foreseen that there would be a need for such a vehicle. They didn't have to have COVID come in. It just turned out that COVID was fortunate for them in the sense that they could deploy their technology. But they knew that mRNA was very important for the future, and they were betting on it. Of course, there must have been naysayers as well, but that aside, there was a foresight based on scientific insights. And often innovation is based on technical novelties or inventions, and therefore inventions become quite important in such kind of entrepreneurship. And the process of resourcing and de-risking becomes quite important. A very classic and very extreme example is drug discovery process, where how you fund it, how it goes through various stages of de-risking is very well documented and well known, and all of you must be familiar with that as well. And this whole process has and there are global role models. And when I tell you this, please remember, I'm not just talking about, these are in today's world, scientists of repute build businesses. Okay. This is today. So please don't think of a world 30 years back. Today's world, if you want to convert your science to something of use, you have to think of ways to take it ahead on your own sometimes, or with other partners, and figure that out. Here is Francis Arnold, Nobel Prize in 2018, several startups, Gevo, Provivi, Aralis Bio, and so on, in synthetic bio and bioprocess engineering. Jennifer Doudna, Nobel Prize in 2020, and the inventor, one of the key inventors for CRISPR technologies, right? Developing several startups, and Intelia was in the news sometime back for some of the gene therapy results that they are showing right now. Sahin and Turechi are the founders of BioNTech. And BioNTech, of course, is one of the key people in mRNA vaccines for COVID-19. As I will tell you a little later, there's a scientific backend to it, which is also very important. Professor Bob Langer is called the Edison of medicine because of the real prolific technology outputs that he has. More than 20 startups, 1,400 patents, and producing several companies. He also has a role, maybe a little smaller, in Moderna as well. Richard Friend from Cambridge, who actually inaugurated the Venture Center. We requested him to inaugurate it because he's a Cavendish professor. We have this notion of a Cavendish professor, but what he said that day was that to publish his Nature paper, he waited for 8 months before, so that his patents were secure before he did that. Okay, and this was on organic light emitting diodes, and a founder of 3 companies as well. And of course, a name we are all proud of to see as an international brand of Bose and Bose speakers and so on. Professor Amar Bose from MIT, who went on to set up Bose Corporation as a leading science-based startup as well. This, by the way, is just a quick glimpse I wanted to show you that when Oxford shows off its scientific prowess, it shows this graph, which is the spinouts that come out of it. Look at the prolific nature of the startups. Of course, there's an underlying story underneath it. I won't have time to talk about it, but you can see that this is how science is proliferating and producing results and impact in today's world. And this is not something which is alien to India. Okay, it is. We should also realize that this is something which there are Indians who have done it many years back. In 1892, Dr. Prafulla Chandra Ray started the Bengal Chemical Works, and this is probably one of the earliest modern science-based industries that I could come across, and it's still alive as a company. It's of course a public sector enterprise now, but this is something which has been happening for quite some time. You're also heard of many people in this slide out here, right? For many people, young people, and especially women in the audience, Kiran Majumdar Shaw is such an iconic and role model for many of them as well, of Biocon. Krishna Ella of Bharat Biotech, or Meher Padamji right here in Pune with us in Thermax, Adar Punawala in Serum Institute, Pramod Chaudhary from Praj, who is again in Pune and runs the biggest industrial biotech company in India. First generation entrepreneur building a industrial biotech company, which was venture funded, by the way. Dr. K.K. Gharda, who set up Gharda Chemicals, for example. And Dr. Reddy's. Dr. Anji Reddy is an alumnus of NCL, right here from Pune, who went on to set up Dr. Reddy's. A student from Pune who went on to set up a very large pharmaceutical company as well. So these are all possibilities for each of you in the audience, and each of you, I want to encourage you to consider those options. But by the way, those are big names. What about the emerging big names, right? So this is a slide of emerging entrepreneurs from Pune, from the Venture Center ecosystem. All of you have heard during COVID the name of MyLab, and MyLab is, of course, was the first to get the CDSU approved indigenous RT-PCR kit out, and then the antigen test, and now the self-testing kit as well, right out of Pune. So it's great to have such entrepreneurs in Pune. Nobel Exchange, which is running the citywide demonstration of organic waste conversion to bio-CNG. IOCL sells some of the gas through their petrol pumps. This is a role model for the entire Satat program that the government has announced across the country for handling waste in all the cities of the world. I told you about Actorius. Actorius is the first CDSU approved circulating tumor cell diagnostic solution company, or first dual powered hand crank defibrillator from Jeevtronics right out of Pune. US FDA approved spinal implants, India's Medical Technologies, running from Pune, Parvati Industrial Estate, or Tridiagonal Solutions, a startup which originated from NCL, Green Pyramid, another startup from NCL as well, Flightbase, which is a drones company, first software platform for commercial drones, or this one, which is going to make waves shortly, is already serving a lot of our vaccine manufacturers. There's OmniBRX, which is single-use disposable bioreactors for biopharma. We're all proud of these companies who are making waves, and this is all within reach because it's not like these people are out of the world. They're all people who have set up companies and who have backgrounds similar to you as well. There are many startups and spin-offs coming out of NCL as well now. The government allows such processes, and NCL has put in place mechanisms to make it happen. Here again, there are several very interesting companies. I won't have time to speak through all of them, but in energy, devices, diagnostics, materials, water treatment, therapeutics. So a whole variety of different companies out here as well. But there are unique challenges. When you work with science-based ideas, you add number of risks to your already set of risks. The first thing is you have to develop technology. There's a risk of it not working. There's scale-up risk, multiple stages of de-risking. All of that happens. There's intellectual property risk, which becomes important again. You have to partner with many different institutions because government in India, a lot of the publicly funded institutions have a lot of the know-how, the R&D funding, and the facilities available to them. So you have to learn how to work with them and partner them in different ways. Also, there's a need for a richer ecosystem. It's not like an ecosystem for you as an IT company just involves a computer and a few people in a room and you're on to business. Here you need labs, you need facilities, you need scientific instruments, you need expertise in different areas. So it's very different in terms of how you run such science-based businesses. But of course, you might have the edge because not everybody can do it if you are knowledgeable enough to run such a business. And of course, a big challenge for many of our incubators is that these kind of businesses are set up by first generation entrepreneurs who have no exposure to business. So they're learning along the way. It's not difficult, but nonetheless, it is something which has to be learned. So many of the companies I've told you are all first generation entrepreneurs from the Venture Center network. But why do people do it? We do it because, it's very satisfying to empower people with solutions. And I want to leave this with you. Me personally, I have always been interested in artificial limbs. And this is something which I think we have to understand, that we cannot empower people with solutions if we don't convert our science into products and services and learn to find ways to take it ahead. If you're not the entrepreneur, you should find others who can take it ahead and work with them and support them to take it ahead. Otherwise, your own ideas will never see the light of day, right? And of course, the impact on the economy is phenomenal, right? There was a recent report from Stanford talking about the extent of impact it has had on the Silicon Valley, or MIT has had on the Massachusetts economy. And you know that how universities and research institutions have powered the growth of the East and the West Coast of the US, and how it's so important that their innovations are continuously generated from the scientific activity that they are doing. And as a whole, I think everybody needs to understand that the whole process of research and innovation is entirely dependent on we making this virtuous circle work, which is that if you want to generate new ideas, you want to take things to market, you need to invest in it. That investment will come through government funding or through private investment. In both cases, the source is profits from companies. Even when you say taxes, it's profits those are taxed, right? So if you don't create profits out of products and services that you build and sell, you cannot power innovation. So having a very idealistic view of research and innovation doesn't help. It is something which you have to be very clear that if we want to power the country with innovation, make India an innovation economy, then there's no other option but to build products and services, take them to market, create wealth, and circulate that back into building new ideas and new companies for the country as well. And please keep this in mind in the context of this graph, okay, which I'm trying to show you here. You see on the right-hand side, all this in gray that you see so you will see that this is a graph which shows the assets of companies from 1975 to more recently. And you will see that the the bar chart on the top, which is the gray and the blue, is a proportion. Blue represents the intangible assets and the gray represents the tangible assets. And you will notice in 1975, most of the companies which are top of the list, 5 largest global companies by market cap were IBM, ExxonMobil, Procter & Gamble, GE, and 3M. And it was largely tangible assets that they were talking about. But look at what has happened today. That is, in 2018, it's primarily intangible assets, and it's the whole list of 5 has changed. It's Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. And that is the way it's going to happen in India as well over a period of time. So I think it's important that we understand this and contribute to building these kind of assets, productive assets for the economy and value creation over a period of time. So here are a few quick lessons before I close. First of all, if you want to build anything of this kind and business or a product, it's very important to be dissatisfied. If you're very content, it is very hard to build something new. If necessity is the mother of invention, then dissatisfaction must be its father. This quote is quite appropriate over there. One of the things I like to tell students is that, look, all your life, you're given problem sets and you sit and answer them, right? You never learn how to frame problems, how to identify problems. And that is really critical to doing science. Good problem identification is key. Ask good questions, okay? It is not adequate to just keep solving problems all your life. You have to address the most important problems out there and not necessarily the most convenient ones and not necessarily the ones provided by others to you as problem definitions. If you want to be an entrepreneur, it's important to have a beginner's mind. As this quote says here, in the beginner's minds, there are many possibilities. In the experts, there are few. So imagine Elon Musk 15 years from now talking about electric vehicles. Okay. And, I'm sure there were many so-called experts who shot down the idea, but he persisted with it, right? He was a beginner out there. More recently, Elon Musk has been talking about neural implants. Okay. And there's been a lot of criticism, a lot of shouting around about this and so on and so forth. Just this week, there has been a news report that somebody has been cured of depression, clinical depression, using brain implants and brain stimulation. So you can see that it's important to have a beginner's mind. And, it's not, please don't shoot down ideas too soon, whether you're a mentor or a mentee and a new entrepreneur. There is a gray area in all this, which is, of course, creativity. How do you nurture creativity? And not everybody can get there, but not everybody is there. So one has to identify those creative opportunities. For example, here all the dots in these pictures are the same in all 3 pictures. Somebody saw a cat in it, right? And that person had this creative bent of mind to see it. Now, how that process happens, I cannot tell you. But you can see that creativity in connecting the dots is very critical in technology, technology development. A very good example of this is the recent mRNA vaccine. So if you see, this is a chart showing you the history of the mRNA vaccine from a recent article in Nature. You will see that there are 3 vertical columns here: mRNA technology, lipid-based delivery systems, and then the mRNA with lipids. You will know the reason the mRNA technology worked was because there were parallel developments happening in mRNA technology and also the lipid-based delivery systems. And people had to know to connect it. Today, when I look back in hindsight, maybe I can show you this graph and tell you that there are these 3 verticals out there. But imagine when it was happening, somebody who had to be working on this field had to read, be aware of developments in the lipid-based delivery systems field and put the 2 together. Right? Somebody had to know in the lipid-based delivery systems field that this key development here, discovery that modified RNA evades immune detection, is something that had happened in 2005, and that would be relevant to some of these developments here. When COVID-19 happened, somebody had to be aware that this technology would be relevant for COVID-19 vaccines. Now, that does not happen by if you're not reading widely, exploring new areas. If you're very narrow in your focus, you will very often miss those opportunities to connect the dots. Okay, protect your ideas. Filing patents is very critical in innovation, and this is nothing new to India. In 1899, Sir Visvesvaraya Bharat Ratna had patented an automatic gate for the Khadakwasla Dam in Pune. Okay, and that particular patent he licensed out there for use. And remember, this is done at a time when there were no electronics to do the automatic gates. Okay, and he could ensure that the dam stored more water for Pune city. So when that was possible then, or J.C. Bose who's credited with the first US patent granted to an Indian, or Dr. Bhatnagar, the founder of the CSIR system, who had filed 29 patents, developed industrial collaborations, licensed them out, earn money for his Punjab University lab and run it, right? That was possible then. I don't know why we lost steam somewhere in between. It was only in the early 90s that Dr. Mashelkar started mobilizing and creating some momentum around filing of patents in the country. And people should realize that even Mahatma Gandhi was a big champion of inventions, and he wanted the filing the patents is just a process. What you do with it is up to you after that. If you think that the best way to take it to market is to give it out to everybody, that's your call. But it's important to patent it first. Okay. And innovation, one other important aspect of innovation I want to point out is that it's a team sport. It is not an individual sport. So on the left, you see Usain Bolt running the 100 meters dash. And on the right, you see this elite group of 43 athletes who helped Kipchoge run the marathon in 2 hours. Okay. Now, this is a good picture of what happens in an entrepreneurial program, that in any startup, very often it is a team effort. And people who are used to running a sprint or running alone have to very often learn how to build teams, how to grow, how to work together to make things happen. And it might turn out very often that you might be one of these people in black t-shirts out here helping the guy in the white t-shirt move faster. So you as a scientist might be one of the team, whereas the champion who's taking all the onus of making sure the thing happens at the end might be somebody else. And that is also part of what an entrepreneurial journey can be. So here is a very current example, right? So for BioNTech, for example, these two people, Turechi and Sahin, co-founded mRNA vaccine. And of course, they bet on it. They have put a lot of effort into building this and have taken it this far. And fantastic to see their successes as scientists who have built companies of great value to society and making a huge difference. But the journey started with scientists who you may not hear as much. Perhaps you'll hear one day in a Nobel Prize. But here is Carrico and Weizmann, who did some of the work with modified RNA. And they are, by the way, Carrico works for BioNTech, okay, as a team member, very senior team member of BioNTech. So that is another thing that I want to keep. I want you to keep in mind, innovation is a team sport, and people need to know how to play in a team as well. And technology foresight is very key, as I told you. This picture, it dates back to the early 90s when people were walking around with all these cameras and videos and so video cameras and so on and so forth, and electronics on their head. These were the earliest days of wearables in MIT in the early 90s. as this is more than others see, and who see farther than others see, and who see before others see. And that is very key to entrepreneurship. So before I
Recording in progress.
You just want to be able to do something that you feel is worthy of yourself, right? And that drives many entrepreneurs. There's a mission, there's a goal to solve a problem. Money is always good. Financial stability is good. I would love to see scientists, doing very well financially as well. But it's very often a byproduct. It's not the main purpose of entrepreneurship. For people who make that a main purpose, the first time or second time they hit a roadblock, they'll give up. Okay, they will not continue with it. So please don't make that the main goal, but it is an important goal nonetheless. And that's where ecosystems are very important. Where in this difficult journey, you need to find paths which are connected, where there are no gaps, there are no missing stones. So if there's a pond like this, you have missing stones, you won't be able to cross it. You want to be able to cross it. And that's where ecosystems are important. Pune is fortunate to have a good innovation ecosystem, and many incubators would help you do that. So you might want to leverage such ecosystems wherever you can find it, so that your innovation journey, you're able to find those stones that are missing, connect the dots, and take it ahead as well. And in this, for first generation entrepreneurs, grants are very critical. And fortunately, the money becomes very important. The government has stepped in with money in the very beginning to try and reduce your risks. And I hope many of you can use that. Here is a map. By the way, Venture Center has a good database all of you can use, funding.venturecenter.co.in. Now, if you go there, you'll find a whole lot of funding sources. I just want to tell you these green ones that you see here, by the way, this is all innovation funding. It's not research funding. Okay. And you will see that all these green things are all thanks to the government. Without it, it'll only be people who have family money who would have been able to do business. But this is something which has really enabled a lot of entrepreneurs to do this. And in the biotech space, BIRAC, which is an arm of DBT, has really pioneered this area with a whole array of funding pockets, which you can leverage if you're committed to entrepreneurship. But remember, this is not research funding. This is innovation funding. It's meant for people who are committed to taking things to the market. Okay, and not necessarily just happy doing creative things and enjoying the process. Okay. One other last point is about this DSIR notification. I want to point out that there's a government notification which allows scientists to form companies in most institutions other than DRDOs and ISROs of the world. And this notification came in 2009, and you can see here permitting researchers to have equity stake in scientific enterprises and spin-offs. And this is something which is a great enabler if you want to build spin-off companies. And a similar kind of OM from DBT is shown on the right over there, which is the Department of Biotechnology as well. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much. If there is the questions, I'm happy to take them, but I'll leave the floor to the organizers and let them decide if they have time for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Premnath. Indeed, it was a wonderful lecture. It was kind of a whole life cycle of entrepreneurship. There are some questions from the participants. I think most of those questions were already answered in your presentation. There are somebody asked about what are the government initiatives on online platform where youth can apply to startup program. I think
Yeah, maybe I can just add a couple of things over there.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you are a startup, if you are a young entrepreneur, and if you have not yet figured out which problem you want to address, you are a budding entrepreneur, there are also programs from the government which allow you to take up a short-term fellowship to explore a problem in an area of interest to you, which is worthy of a startup, and then take some time to raise money. So, for example, there's something called a Nidhi Entrepreneur in Residence program, which gives a subsistence fellowship for young entrepreneurs to get started. Gives them 1 year to work on their idea at least and get it refined. There's also something for social entrepreneurs from BIRAC called the Social Innovation Immersion Program, which includes also time for you to immerse yourself in the problem and define problem definition. So if some of you are really